Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Desi, and today I am reacting to another What Is If Alt Hist video. This one is particularly interesting because it's about the population pyramid slash population decline of a lot of Western and Eastern countries. It'll be interesting to see what he's focusing on. This is something that I've done research on myself. I started looking this up like 2017, 2018 when Japan started going through its population crisis. And I've always wondered what this will mean like 25 and 50 years in the future. Hopefully I live that long to, knock on wood, see what happens, because it makes me wonder if it's going to be like, 800 years ago after the Black Death, when it was actually good for society to have a population decline, albeit that's a different circumstance. So I have my own theories going into this. I have not watched this video, and the reason why I'm reacting on it is the last one I got like, I don't know, 2,000 views in 2 days. Normally I only get a couple hundred views because I'm playing video games or reacting to 30-year-old shows. So, yeah, let's give this a go.
In our day and age, we isolate ourselves from history. Anything that happened before World War II might as well have never occurred.
So I've been told that I have comprehension issues, but whatever happened before World War II might as well... I feel like he's already starting with generalizations, and I'm just like 2 seconds in the video, but I'm just going to let that slide, because that's what he do.
The scary thing now is that there's no way to avoid the coming population crash of the 21st century.
It's interesting to see what he blames on this. That's I think, the big reason what motivated me to watch this video is who he's going to blame for the population crisis. I have a theory, though.
In sheer numbers, this population crash will be easily 10 times the size of any of the previous ones in history. The thing is that this sounds impossible and overly dramatic, but the reality is that there's no...
I love the certainty he says it with, though, like, oh, this will be 10 times as worse. Like, you don't know that. You're hypothesizing, and yet you're talking like this is fact. He does this all the time.
The scary thing as well is that the numbers have continually...
God, there he goes again with these text walls. In that most computer models say that global warming won't be disastrous. Why is he... Like, I get that climate change isn't the primary cause of the population decline right now, but I don't know what models he's looking at that's saying global warming isn't going to be disastrous, because it's literally causing the ocean to rise. Like, you know how many people that's going to displace? How is that not disastrous? What models is he talking about? Why doesn't he reference what he's talking about? Relative but not fatal warming? It's not just the climate warming. It's all the other tertiary and ancillary things that happen with the climate warming. Like the ocean levels rising or desertification.
The other horrifying thing is these numbers aren't...
That might actually be accurate. I think that's, in 15 years, I mean, there will be countries that do have, I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I'd say overall that's generally true. It's just going to continue to decline, so.
For most countries in the developed world, this is basically national extinction, but their politicians argue over minutiae, like whether there are 64 genders or giving aid money to some far-off foreign war in a different continent. I think a lot of people don't treat this as...
Yeah. Oh, here it goes with the a lot of people, the generalizations. He's just assuming that nobody's talking about this demographic crisis when people are talking about it. Again, it's his, like, exceptionalism that he's the only one who sees this problem, even though, like, economists... Yeah, I'm sure the House of Representatives in the U.S. and the Senate just are talking about gender and not realizing, like, hey, we need to change our immigration policy or something. Because they never talk about that. They just talk about the war in Ukraine and gender, even though like half of the House is Republican, but that's all they talk about apparently. And also when you look at these fertility rates, I want to see if he talks about this. A lot of the reason why it was so high in the 1800s and early 1900s, well, look at, yeah, you see the recession. I don't know, where does this come from? Okay, whatever. I'm just going to assume this is somewhat accurate. Yeah, so it was low during the recession, and it was really high during the 1800s, early 1900s, and that's because the infant mortality rate was so high. And also, like, when you produced kids, it was free labor essentially for the farm in an agricultural society. And as we shifted to an industrial society or a commercial society, service sector society, you don't need the higher birth rates, and kids are becoming more of an economic burden rather than free labor. You have to send them to college. Daycare's super expensive. There's a whole plethora of issues of why population rates are declining. But
30 years in historic terms isn't that much. When you see these crashing birth rates, keep in mind that this is the future. There will come a time when that...
And also, when you look at 1800s too, even though the birth weight was higher, it doesn't mean that's what the population increase was, because probably a good third to half of those children died before they were 10 because of, typhoid fever or some other thing like that. So I'd say the highest effective birth rate was around the turn of the 20th century.
Whether the Greeks, Romans, Indians, Muslims, Chinese, or 18th century Europe. Authors since the Bible or Herodotus have been writing about...
So is he going to blame decadence as part of the reason why the population is declining? I just want to see if he uses, like, the actual documented, realistic reasons why there's population decline, rather than, in his opinion, it's some immoral thing and that women are too loose nowadays or something.
Ever was asked what was the thing that killed the Greeks or Romans, he said it was a collapsing birth rate. Islam 1,000 years ago...
Okay. Have to go through this because here he goes textballing. I can't let him get away with these. Super good history of philosophy. Cover all age. His writing style is so odd. It's like his editing is off in these too. Like, he doesn't space between a lot of these. I'm just nitpicking, but it's just, I feel like he pumps these videos out so fast, and I feel like he could really do with some editing. He just drops these text walls, and, I guess he doesn't expect anyone to read them. Why did he even reference this if it's unreadable? Just to fill up space? I have better things to do. Yeah, like produce videos every 5 seconds that need editing. So he's making these claims of why Athens fell, and he does these brief summaries that I don't know how these really help what he's saying.
It was a secular, urban, scientific society, and then those people had no kids. The Turkish barbarians and religious fundamentalists...
But he thinks Rome fell because of declining birth rates, right? At least that's what, if I'm hearing it right. Again, I don't want to make sure I don't get freaking picked on for not having, comprehension issues. But he says that Greece, of course, Athens, Greece and Rome fell due to declining birth rates, right? That's not true. Like, Rome fell because it was an expansionist society based on slavery, and once there were no new lands to conquer, there was no incentive for the soldiers, because when Rome advanced, when it was in its expansion stage, it was constantly taking new territory, and it would resettle its soldiers there, so there's an incentive to fight. When Rome was contracting and having all these internal issues that Diocletian tried to solve, and the later emperors, it didn't know how to keep itself together. And only the Byzantine Empire, with its wealth, trade networks, and system of governance, figured it out with the theme system and all that, where the West fell apart because, again, it had all these barbarians to replenish, the citizens that wouldn't serve. It also had, like, a feudal system that got established. And also there were plagues or all sorts of things. It wasn't because of a declining birth rate. I've never read anywhere there's because of declining birth rate. And the Greeks, of course, he doesn't consider the Macedonians and the wars of the Diadochi. The Greeks fell apart because they overextended and nobody could hold it together after Alexander died, because Alexander didn't leave an heir. And outside of Egypt and maybe Macedonia, the Ptolemaic Egypt held together. But the rest of his empire fell apart because it was overextended, and, of course, nepotism. When you don't have a good system of governance, when you have a leader who doesn't leave an heir, it's the same thing that happened to the Mongol Empire before it. It's not because of birth rates. Like, I don't know what he's getting at.
Emperor Augustus's Rome was panicking as the Roman elite weren't breeding, as the government created policies to encourage the birth rate. In 19th century France, the first people in Europe...
Rome was still expanding during Augustus's period, though. Like, the contractions didn't happen until, like, Marcus Aurelius's time. Like, and I don't know what, he doesn't reference this. He just says the Romans were panicking because the elites weren't having enough babies. What? Where's his source?
If a society is rural and religious, it will have a stable birth rate. If it's secular or urban, it won't. The thing is, every rural society in history is religious and every urban society is secular. So really, we're looking at the same factor.
Well, what about the Soviet Union when the Bolsheviks took power? I'm pretty sure it was a secular rural society. And like, I would agree, yeah, like rural societies generally tend to have higher birth rates because when you have a farm or an agricultural estate, it's good to have a lot of kids because that's free labor. Whereas in an urban society, the entire dynamics change, especially once housing prices start to get higher, it becomes harder to live, and also education level and whatnot. So, yeah. But again, religion, I don't know. I mean, I guess if, like, Mormons, even the Mormons' birth rate isn't, like, yes, it's higher than a lot of other denominations of Christianity or whatever, but even their birth rate is declining. Like, I know Mormons, so it's not universal that religion causes higher birth rate. But I would agree, yes, rural societies do have higher birth rates. Cities, industrialized societies don't.
The Middle Ages were a much more complicated society than we give them credit for, and even back then, the cities had a reputation for...
Sources again? Yes, I know bathing was common. Cleanliness in the cities wasn't, though, because they'd throw their night soil out of the windows, and they lived all in close proximity in the villages, which is why the plague spread so easy. So yes, bathing was common, but cleanliness was not. Witchcraft wasn't viewed as a real citation. Invented modern science and the scientific method. I guess Thomas Aquinas, maybe? Church was the biggest funder of science. Yeah, because the church had money. And also he's, again, everything you know about the Middle Ages, this is European Middle Ages. Of course, he completely ignores, like, what's going on in Asia, what's going on in the Middle East. Everything's Eurocentric with him. Large parts of the Middle Ages had higher social mobility than today. It wasn't... What? There was a clearly established... Unless you're talking about, like, merchants in, like, Venice or something like that, where there was social mobility. If you're talking about, like, in England and in France, there's no social mobility. If you were born a serf, you stayed a serf. There's a caste system in place. And he doesn't even, like, where's his sources? He just puts a bunch of crap on the window and talks over it, and maybe hopes people doesn't look at it too hard. The most technologically advanced society in history up to this point. Medieval Europe was advanced in weapons. Okay, well, what? Medieval Europe. That's a 500-year span. Oh my gosh. The Romans are Chinese. Well, what about the Middle Easterners who were going through their Renaissance in, like, around 1000 AD? And all the things that, like, sailing and all the other... I'm pretty sure a lot of stuff came from south. And, like, the Europeans didn't even really have any, like, large-scale libraries or anything, because I remember when I was reading about when the Reconquista started, when they took Toledo, one of the cities, or it was either Toledo or Salamanca, and all these libraries and books got circulated, and they never had anything like that before. Atheists took over the Italian universities, and the citation, the Protestant Reformation didn't happen until 1500, and they cracked down. The church cracked down on heresy.
Islam has been in a nosedive over the last decade. Fun side note, I've seen a lot of analysts say that the rise of TikTok is the thing which is destroying faith in Islam today.
I love that religion is so heavily a component of this. It's just his tradcon views seeping in. Like there's so many other things that are causing the population. I don't even think he's really even addressed it. He's just going into religion.
The thing is that we humans didn't evolve to live in cities. We are biologically the exact same as the hunter-gatherers who lived 100,000.
This is true. Good job. Like, I'm glad that got mentioned. Yes, we are not meant to live in cities. We are indeed hunter-gatherers that sit in front of screens nowadays when we're meant to be, like, outside and working with our hands and being exposed to the elements.
Then, after the social traditions and standards of the agrarian era would erode, you would see complete civilizational collapse. The birth rate wouldn't be able to sustain itself and the society would crash into complete decadence. Keep in mind, in pre-industrial society...
I'm not sure where he's getting at, to be honest. Like, it's one of those situations where I have trouble following, because he has like, oh, well, 90% of the population in the Middle Ages, well, the rural farmers controlled everything, and the people of the cities were ingenuitive and came up with all these ideas, but then they caused... I'm just really trying to follow along. But then they didn't have a sustainable birth rate, so they collapsed. But thankfully, there was a lot of rural people who made up the majority of the country, so they were able to keep it stable. Like, I don't know where he's... I'm not sure where he got that or what he's sourcing. I think it's just him talking out of his butt again.
Which were 90% rural, such as the Roman Empire, Abbasid, Islam, Babylon, l'Ancien Regime France, or Sung China, faced really bad decadence. So what would the decadence of a 90% urban society?
Really bad decadence. That's okay. He's referenced that. I guess that's what he's getting at. Really bad decadence in the cities is what causes... decadence and lack of religiousness is what causes population decline in the cities. And that since humans are hunter-gatherers and are meant to have, like... well, I mean, hunter-gatherers, but agrarian rural lifestyles, if we don't have that, then society is going to collapse. Okay.
Part 3, Mouse Utopia.
Oh,
I'm
no.
going to keep this section short since I've already made a long video detailing it in much greater depth.
Oh no, not Mouse Utopia again. He did this last time. Like, why? I think Mouse Utopia is like the pseudo-intellectual incel pipe dream of what's going to happen in the future to society. And that they're going to be the beautiful ones while all the other mice just like fight and screw and kill each other.
And although they're now adults, they no longer engage in aggressive behavior or in reproductive behavior. And we call them the beautiful ones. Most of these live in the apartment houses and rarely come out.
But as far as the mouse is concerned, he's a nothing? Is that...
He's a total nothing.
And then the mouse social structure broke down. The male mice became effeminate while the female mice became masculine. The mice stopped interacting socially, with a lot becoming autistic. The mouse
The mice becoming autistic. How do you prove autism in a mouse? Oh my gosh. The mice became autistic. Like, what does that even mean? It's using, like, internet memes to describe Mouse Utopia, which itself was a meme.
were gangs of violent mice who would kill those who continued to breed. The mouse birth rate crashed precipitously, as each time the mouse colony completely died out. Doesn't this sound eerily similar to what's going on in our world? The Mouse Utopia...
Of course, there he goes. There's the parallel. I'm not gonna use any sources, but I'm gonna talk about Mouse Utopia, because that's where our society's heading. We're all gonna become autistic, and the freaking people who decide to breed are going to get killed off by a bunch of angry incels or something.
But the thing is that this is the only paradigm that explains a lot of the weirdness of our society. We are the first era in history which wants to commit civilizational suicide. The first era where the...
We don't want to commit There's no wanting. There's no active. We don't get up in the morning. Society doesn't get up in the morning and say, "Wow, we want to commit social suicide by not having children." And he had like a moment there where he's like, "Okay, this was done in the '60s, and I get that it's not completely relative, but it's the only thing we have." It's like, come on, man. Like, I'm still waiting for him to actually talk about the causes of the low birth rate, other than decadence and lack of civic values, lack of religion, and we don't live out in the country anymore. Like, here's the thing. If you go to, like, counties in eastern Washington and everything else like that, they're not going to have high birth rates. Even in the rural areas of this country, it doesn't mean they're going to have more children. Like, it's just not the same paradigm that it was 150 years ago. The entire system has changed. So even if we were going to go back to a rural society, that doesn't mean the population rates are automatically going to increase, especially here.
We are the society which has the strongest feminism and most effeminate men ever. Nothing like it has been seen before in history, but it can all be explained by Mouse Utopia. I was watching my friend Homath's YouTube channel, and he showed...
Oh my gosh, so Mouse Utopia is the explanation for men becoming more feminine. Okay.
A video of how in Korea they have something called the 4B movement. What that effectively means is that Korean women will stop having children, any kind of relationships, speaking with, or sex with men. This is terrifying because it just proves the Mouse Utopia paradigm.
No, it does. How does that prove the Mouse Utopia? Okay, the 4B movement, and I've heard other people talk about it, I've done some very preliminary research in it, it's because women are running into a glass ceiling. The men in their society treat them like crap, and they're just seen as baby factories and are constantly just overlooked and treated poorly. And they're like, okay, well, we're not going to have any more children, and y'all can suck it. We're piecing out. They're like doing what the MGTOW movement should have been, but for women, of just being like, okay, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to form a friend circle and have a unified front so change can happen. It's not... What does that have to do with Mouse Utopia?
The thing that scares me about Mouse Utopia is that it's the perfect logical endpoint of the chain of argument I went through before, of what a majority urban population would end up.
So I'm just curious, he's been on for like 5... So what is like half this video just going to be Mouse Utopia? Like, I was expecting at least a little bit of like why is it... Okay, I'll get to it later. But, like, he's literally just referencing Mouse Utopia again and again and again.
When one group has a lot of people they go out and conquer, using politics to rationalize it.
When one group has a lot of people they go out and conquer. So, countries with high birth rates are just going to go attack other countries then? Okay, hold on, I gotta read this stupid crap again. The European Union, although leftist and socialist, is very conservative in that it wants stability in all things. And, like, not all the European Union is socialist, by the way. There are countries in the European Union, like, I think Poland is part of the EU, and they're not very leftist at all. Or Italy, for that matter. No social... aging population... No dynamic industries or technological progress. Where does he get this from? He spelled entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. Oh my gosh. Whatever. That's the only one I've seen that's blatant, so I'll let it slide. I don't want to be like Vaush or somebody and be like, this guy's an idiot because he doesn't know how to spell. But, like, again, he just pumps these out. And then I hate these text walls that he puts.
For example, the population of Africa has grown 5 times over since 1950.
So does that mean they're going to go on an expansionist rampage and take over the EU? Because that's kind of what he said earlier.
It's expected...
Because according to him, if a country has a higher population growth and a high population rate, they automatically will go and try to take over other countries. even though in Africa they're having their own demographic crises. Like a lot of these countries in Africa, I don't think are inclined to start conquering when they have internal problems. But according to him, especially with his bias towards Africa, apparently they're a threat now to the Western world. I don't know.
In a world where the developed nations will have half the population they do now by the end of this century, Africa will end up having a quarter of its current population. This is since Africa is completely dependent upon the fertilizer, industrial goods, or agriculture in other regions of the world. If you pull one nut out of the African system, the unstable nature of...
Okay, hold on. He's doing it again. They're completely dependent on the fertilizer. Okay. But, like, these countries that are in red in Africa, these are in the desert. And a lot of these countries in Central and South Africa have really good farmland. So, with industrialization and farming techniques, I think that Africa will be self-sustaining. Okay, he's talking about Mormons here. They are not going to be a quarter of the American population. Like, Mormons are already having a decline in their numbers, which, of course, he doesn't bother to reference because he only has, a couple of days to make these videos because, moolah. But, like, the Mormons are having issues themselves, and, like, they're worried about their reproduction rates. Yes, they tend to have more children, but at the same time, the Mormons are facing what the rest of the world is facing. And it's not just religiosity that's going to make them reproduce. It's the fact that it's hard to have kids now. I'm still waiting for him to address the actual reasons why the birth rates are declining.
For example, there was a version of the Black Death in the 6th century.
I love how he talks about the Black Death so much, but he doesn't talk about how, like, the plight of the peasants and the proletariat got better because of it. He just talks about conquest. Hold on, he's talking about the Byzantine Empire. Justinian plague, which also hit Persia, by the way. But the reason why the Arabs took over a huge chunk of Byzantium and completely took over the Persian Empire is because the Byzantines and the Persians have been fighting each other for decades, and they completely decimated each other's armies. And when the Byzantines were finally able to respond, all of their veteran troops were dead, and they sent a bunch of raw recruits against a bunch of nomadic horsemen, and they got completely overran, and they lost a bunch of their territory. I don't know why he just doesn't, like, do some... I guess he doesn't have time, because he's got to pump these out every couple of days.
As a general rule, though, the more religious or rural a population is, the better off it'll be. On top of this, what we would see is that in the short term...
Okay. Rural and religious equals prosperity. I have so many ideas of what I'm going to label this video. Decadence, religion, rural, and then Mouse Utopia. Like, half this video is just Mouse Utopia.
Basically, once inequality gets high enough and normal wages get low enough, you've removed any incentive for social cooperation. What eras of peace and...
Okay, he finally addressed, like, the oligarchical system, 35 minutes into the video. So that's one of the reasons why I think that the population rate is declining, is because there's wealth disparity. And it's hard to get by.
Stability, whether or not you believe in climate change, if climate change is true, and I don't really know if it is, then the...
He doesn't know if climate change is true. And he doesn't think that that's the reason why there's part of the reason why there's a population decline. Which is one of the reasons, and I'll mention them what I think when he gets done with his freaking...
As the birth rate crashes and we have to rebuild the world and the populations, I think that we will see the development of new ideologies and religions to explain what's going on and push good values. And I think that the next century...
Push good values and religion.
Will be a religious golden age for this reason.
Oh my gosh, what is his deal with religion? Like, it's really weird. Alright, so... I'm exhausted after watching all of that. I don't know why it needed to be 40 minutes. half of it, or a good third of it, was Mouse Utopia, which he kept referencing. Here's my theory on why the population rate is declining. To him, it's decadence, or these are the things that I've got from it. It's decadence, lack of religiousness / atheism, wokeness, and the fact that industrialization, that we're not rural. If you're rural and religious, according to him, you're more likely to reproduce. The big reason why I think the population rates are declining is it's too expensive to have kids. You have real estate prices that are going absolutely bonkers and going up and up and up. So you have a middle class that's no longer able to obtain a home. And daycare is exceptionally expensive. So if you have a kid, if you don't make a solid enough amount of money, like, you're going to be on the struggle bus. And I've seen this with my friends. And it's part of the reason, like, I don't want to mess around with that. Like, this isn't the 50s and 60s, and real estate prices and inflation, we've had all this crap going on. It's no longer economically viable to have children anymore. So that's one. And the other big one, or it's maybe you could call it 2 and 3, is the uncertainty in the future. With climate change, a lot of people don't want to bring children into a world that's going to have a lot of problems with the climate. And of course, Whatifalthist doesn't even acknowledge that. He doesn't even know if climate change is a thing, which really, really makes me question how does he sources all these books and all this material, but he doesn't bother to read the clear empirical evidence that shows that climate change is a thing, and it's going to become a bigger thing, and it's going to become a huge problem. It already is a huge problem. That's another reason why people don't want to reproduce. And quality of life, of course. Like, why would you want to bring... when people have kids, a lot of the reason why is they, like, okay, I want to provide a better future for my kids than what I had. And if that isn't the case, there's not a big incentive to keep reproducing. Why would you want to bring a child into a world who's going to have it worse off than you? And, of course, the oligarchy and the dynamics of wealth is where you have a shrinking middle class and an upper class who is a minority yet has the majority of all the money. And, of course, as I mentioned before, homes aren't affordable. Daycare is expensive. Also, people don't have as much time. I think that's the other big factor, is when you're going to college and you're becoming educated, and also when you have to work more to pay your rent, you don't have time for kids. And you want to send them to daycare because you're working? Good luck with that. So I don't know why I feel like he got close to addressing those fundamental issues of why people aren't having children. But, of course, he's pandering to a certain audience, so he says that the lack of traditional values is a big reason. And, of course, using Mouse Utopia rather than using actual hard data, using a study 80 years ago, or 60 years ago. Sorry, my math is wrong. It's really frustrating. Like, he puts these text walls up as he's talking over them, and you go through and you read the text points, and a lot of them just don't make any sense. So, anyways, I tried, but he's going to do what he's going to do. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.